Can I share this table?
Can I share this table? The room went still, not just because the voice came from a man most people had only seen in headlines, but because of who he asked and where he asked it. Charleston's Midtown Grill wasn't a fancy place. Vinyl booths, chipped counters, the scent of bacon grease lingering in the air. But for Zaria, it was her second home. Table 7, near the window, always hers during the 11 to 4 shift. Red uniform pressed, white apron tied around her waist, name badge shining. Zaria. She didn't look up at first when he walked in, too busy refilling coffee for a grumpy trucker and dodging the usual whispers about her smile being too much for a black girl in a place like this. But then, a hush swept over the room like someone had hit mute. The man on crutches, one pant leg neatly folded where a leg used to be, stood in front of her, not asking for coffee or service, but something far more personal. He was black, tall, and moved with the kind of quiet strength you only earn through pain. Expensive tailored suit, face familiar, eyes tired. "Can I share this table?" he repeated, this time softer, not as a demand, almost like a plea. Zaria blinked, her hand still on the coffee pot. Around them, forks froze mid-air. Conversations died. Even the kitchen fell silent, because everyone in that diner knew who he was. Cassian Rook, billionaire tech CEO, widely private, accident survivor, and the only black man in that room who wasn't holding a tray or washing a dish. For a second, Zaria thought it was a prank. Then she saw his eyes, and the weight behind them, the kind of look only someone who'd fought too many battles alone would understand. She nodded slowly, then gestured to the empty seat across from her. What followed that simple invitation, two strangers sharing a small table in a southern diner, would become one of the most powerful untold black stories of the decade. A story of pain, race, resilience, and the kind of dignity that doesn't come from money or fame, but from choosing kindness when the world offers cruelty. This isn't just another viral video. This is a hidden worth story. And before we dive deeper, tell us, where are you tuning in from today? We love seeing how far these stories travel. Drop your city or country in the comments, because sometimes the smallest table can hold the biggest moments. And sometimes a quiet question can shake a room louder than any scream. Now let's go back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with power. It starts with pain. Zaria Whitmore had been working at Midtown Grill for 3 years. She knew every scratch on the countertop, every booth that wobbled if you leaned too far left, and which regulars tipped well versus which ones just smiled and said, "God bless you," like that paid the rent. She wasn't just another waitress. She was the soul of that place. The kind of woman who greeted strangers like old friends, remembered how you took your coffee, and smiled like she meant it, even on the days she didn't. At 23, Zaria carried herself like someone twice her age. There was grace in her movements, confidence in her voice, and a calm steadiness that came not from peace, but from surviving storms. She was beautiful, but not in the filtered, magazine cover kind of way. No, Zaria's beauty was deeper. It was in the way her almond eyes lit up when a kid showed her a drawing on a napkin. It was in the gentle lift of her full lips when she told a joke just loud enough for the old man in booth 3 to hear. It was in her skin, smooth, deep brown with golden undertones, and her hair, always tied up in a perfect high bun that somehow never unraveled, no matter how hectic her shift got. Her uniform was always pressed. Red button-up shirt, crisp collar, white apron tied at her waist with her pen tucked in like a surgeon's scalpel. Her name badge, gold with black lettering, pinned squarely on her chest. It read Zaria, but most regulars just called her Z. Not everyone called her that, though. Some called her Girl, even though she was a grown woman. Others used names she didn't repeat out loud, but had learned to deflect with grace. She was used to the comments, the whispers, the looks, especially on Sundays, when the brunch crowd rolled in fresh from church with hearts full of scripture and mouths full of judgment. But Zaria never let it show. Her mama had taught her that. Don't give them your fire, baby. Let them burn in their own bitterness. So Zariah smiled, served coffee, cleaned tables, worked doubles, and every night she took off her apron and headed home to the one-bedroom apartment she shared with her mama and little sister. Mother, Deborah, had been diagnosed with breast cancer 2 years ago. The treatments were long and brutal. Radiation left her tired. Chemo left her bald. But what hurt most wasn't the sickness. It was watching her daughters carry burdens she couldn't lift. Zariah's younger sister, Lila, had once dreamed of attending the Rhode Island School of Design. She was an artist, a real one. Her drawings told stories better than words ever could. But after their mother got sick, Lila spiraled. Depression took root. She dropped out of school. One night, Zariah found her on the fire escape, crying into the city wind, wondering if she still mattered. Zariah didn't sleep that night. She just held her sister until the sun rose. Everything Zariah did, every plate she carried, every tip she tucked into her pocket was for them, for Mama, for Lila, for the family that had already lost too much to lose each other too. She had once been a biology major, full scholarship, honor student. Her professors had called her brilliant. They said she had a future in research, maybe even medicine. But tuition didn't matter when rent was due. When the hospital bills started piling up and the fridge stayed empty too long, she dropped out. No ceremony, no goodbye. Just a quiet email to her advisor, "I won't be coming back." Still, Zariah held on to hope like some folks held on to religion. Quiet, personal, not always easy to explain. She didn't complain. Not when her feet ached, not when customers pretended not to see her, not when coworkers laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. She just kept moving. And yet, underneath all that strength was a woman who sometimes wondered if the world would ever make room for someone like her. Someone too black for the safe suburbs, too poor for the Ivy Leagues, too real for polite society. But that morning, when Cassie and Rook stood in front of her, asking to share a table, something shifted. She didn't know yet how their stories would collide, how her name, her voice, her very presence would ripple far beyond the four walls of that greasy spoon. But she knew one thing. People like her and Cassian weren't supposed to take up space in rooms like that diner, let alone own the table. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly why he chose to ask her. Cassian Rook wasn't born into wealth, not even close. He was born on a rainy Tuesday in a forgotten corner of Augusta, Georgia. His mother named him after her favorite poet, Cassius Clay, before life wore her down and heroin took her out. He never met his father. Some said he was a musician who vanished on tour. Others said he was just another name on a jail record. By the time Cassian turned 7, he was bouncing between foster homes, sleeping on mattresses that smelled like mildew, learning to fight, not because he liked it, but because he had to. It didn't take long before he figured out that the world wouldn't offer people like him handouts or second chances, so he made himself into a weapon. Not one of violence, but of intellect. Cassian read everything. He tore through library books like they were lifelines. Taught himself code at 13. By 15, he was building software under fake names, selling small security patches to companies that didn't know a teenager had just saved them from getting hacked. He got into MIT on a scholarship, showed up with 2 duffel bags, a cheap laptop, and a chip on his shoulder. Professors called him intense. Peers called him arrogant. He didn't care. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to rewrite the story that was written for him. And he did. At 24, he dropped out to launch Rookforge, a cybersecurity firm that promised Fortune 500 level protection for small businesses. Within 3 years, he'd signed contracts with 3 major banks and 2 federal agencies. By 30, he was a billionaire. But success didn't erase the scars, not the physical ones, and certainly not the ones beneath. 2 years before he walked into Midtown Grill, Cassian had been involved in an accident on the I-26 bridge just outside Charleston. He was in the city scouting properties for a tech incubator he wanted to launch in his hometown. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, but then a little boy ran into the road, white, maybe 5 or 6, chasing a red toy truck that had bounced off the sidewalk. The cars weren't slowing down. Cashin didn't think. He moved. The impact shattered his left leg, tore through tendons, and crushed bone beyond saving. He spent 6 months in physical therapy learning how to live with one leg. The boy lived, but no one knew who had saved him. Cashin never gave a press statement, never filed charges, never made it about himself. Because for Cashin, that moment was more than an act of heroism. It was a reckoning. He'd spent his life trying to outrun his beginnings, build a tower high enough to never feel small again. But losing his leg grounded him, slowed him down, forced him to confront the parts of himself he'd buried under success and silence. He hadn't been back to Charleston since, until today. And it wasn't business that brought him to Midtown Grill. It wasn't nostalgia either. It was something else. A photograph, actually. One that had fallen out of an old journal while he was packing up boxes in his New York penthouse. The photo showed his younger brother, Isaac, smiling, 13. Cassian had raised him like a son after their mother died, but Isaac ran away at 17, angry, disillusioned, and tired of living in Cassian's shadow. He hadn't been seen since. In the photo, Isaac was at a table, and next to him, laughing, was a girl. Brown skin, high cheekbones, a smile like sunshine. She looked familiar. Cassian turned the photo over. Written in faded pen was a name, Zariah. Something about her eyes haunted him. So he came to Charleston, followed the trail, tracked down places Isaac used to hang out, friends he used to keep, and the last place he was ever seen, a diner called Midtown Grill. Cassian had no idea what he was walking into that day, but when he stepped inside and saw her, Zariah, with that same quiet fire in her eyes, he knew the universe had aligned something rare. And so, despite every rule about power and appearances, despite the whispers and the stares, he walked up to her. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, not even as a man who had lost a leg saving someone else's child, but simply as a man holding a memory and searching for a piece of his past. "Can I share this table?" he asked. Because maybe, just maybe, the girl in the photo held the key to a brother he lost and a part of himself he thought he'd buried. At first, Zariah didn't recognize him. To her, he was just another customer. Well-dressed, sure, but not the first man in a suit who'd wandered into Midtown Grill. Plenty of folks in the area came through wearing tailored clothes, acting like their money made them invisible. Most treated her like part of the furniture. Some smiled politely, others looked through her. But this one was different. There was weight behind his presence. A quiet storm in the way he moved. Like he'd survived something and carried the memory of it with every step. But Zariah didn't realize who he was until she went to refill his water and saw the picture tucked into the inside flap of his leather notebook. It was old, faded, but she knew that photo. She was in it. 17 years old, her hair braided down her back, grinning wide with a plastic spoon stuck to her nose. Beside her, with one arm slung casually over her shoulder, was Isaac Rook. She hadn't said his name out loud in years. Zariah froze for just a second, enough for Cassian to notice. His eyes followed hers. He closed the notebook slowly, carefully, and for the first time looked her straight in the face. Not as a stranger, but as someone seeing something that shouldn't be possible. "You knew him, didn't you?" he asked, voice low. Zariah didn't answer right away. She looked around the diner, as if suddenly remembering where they were. It was too public, too exposed. But Cassian didn't press. He just nodded like he understood the weight of memories too painful to unpack over a tabletop covered in sugar packets and ketchup stains. Later, on her break, she found him still sitting there, alone, coffee gone cold. She sat across from him without a word. There were no customers nearby. The diner had quieted down. The storm outside hadn't started yet, but the air felt thick, like something big was coming. Isaac was my best friend, Zarya finally said. Cassian didn't speak, just listened. We met at church camp when we were 15. He had that goofy laugh, remember? Like he was always halfway between a joke and a dare. We stayed close even after he moved away. He used to sneak out just to visit me. Said he needed a break from your world. That last part hung in the air. Zarya hadn't meant it to sound bitter, but the truth had a sharp edge. My world, Cassian repeated quietly. Yeah, he said you were brilliant but impossible. That you were trying to build something so big you forgot to look back. Cassian nodded slowly, pain flickering in his eyes. I thought I was protecting him, giving him a path out. I didn't realize he needed something different. Zarya looked down at her hands. She hadn't planned on this conversation. Hadn't expected to see Isaac's face that day, smiling from a time that felt like another life. But now that it had started, she couldn't stop the words. He used to write me letters, long ones, told me about the arguments you two had, the pressure, the loneliness, said he didn't know how to live up to the Rook name, said it didn't feel like his name at all. Cassian's jaw tightened. I loved him, but I was hard on him. I thought that's what it took to survive. I never meant to drive him away. He left Charleston for good 2 weeks after his last letter, Zarya said. I never saw him again. Cassian nodded. Then, carefully, he opened his notebook again, laying the photo between them. He sent me this once. No return address. Just the photo and a single sentence. I was happy here. That was the last I heard from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The diner around them faded into white noise. It was just the two of them, bonded not by choice, but by the gravity of someone they both lost. Why now? Zarya finally asked. Cassian looked at her, his voice softer than it had been all day. Because when I looked at this photo last week, I didn't see Isaac. I saw you. And I realized maybe you're the only person alive who truly knew the part of him I never got to understand. Zarya stared at the photo again, at her younger self frozen in time. And suddenly, the question he asked earlier, "Can I share this table?" didn't feel random. It felt intentional. He hadn't come for food. He came for truth. You think finding me will help you find him? She asked. Cassian didn't answer right away. I think maybe finding you will help me forgive myself. And just like that, they're two separate stories, one of power, the other of perseverance, collided at a cracked vinyl table in a forgotten diner, with a photo, a name, and a past too heavy to carry alone. The silence between Cassian and Zarya didn't last long. It never did in a place like Midtown Grill, where opinions came free and loud, and where boundaries blurred between coffee cups and conversations you didn't ask to overhear. It started with a laugh, a sharp, mean-spirited kind that cut through the air like glass. 3 men sat at the corner booth near the jukebox, regulars, the type who never left more than $1 tip, but had plenty to say about politics and how things used to be. One of them, a middle-aged man with a trucker hat and a beer belly that stretched his denim shirt, leaned back and smirked. Well, would you look at that, he said, loud enough for everyone in a 3-table radius to hear. A crippled billionaire playing house with the help. The other 2 chuckled, slapping the table like he'd just delivered a punchline. Zarya froze. She wasn't new to microaggressions or even outright racism. She'd learned early on how to bite her tongue, keep it moving, not give people like that the satisfaction of a reaction. But this was different. This wasn't just about her. It was about Cassian, too. Cassian didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head. He just stared down at the photo on the table like their words couldn't touch him. But Zarya saw the tension in his jaw, the slight tightening of his hand around his cane. Another voice chimed in. Ain't this some kind of social experiment? He loses a leg, loses his mind, and now he's sharing tables with the help like she's his equal. The third guy added, "Don't worry, y'all. Probably just filming some diversity commercial. Smile for the camera, sweetheart." That was it. Zariah stood up. Not slowly, not subtly. She stood with the kind of presence that made the room pause. Her voice was calm, not loud, not shaking, just clear. "You want to say something? Say it to me." The men stopped laughing. The first one scoffed, "Relax, sugar. No need to get all emotional. We were just joking." Zariah stepped closer. Her apron swayed slightly with each step. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I've been called a lot of things in this place. Been mistaken for less than I am more times than I can count. But what I won't let you do, today or any day, is sit in that booth and act like your cheap words mean more than the man sitting across from me." The diner was quiet now. Even the cook had leaned halfway through the kitchen window, watching. "He's more of a man than you'll ever be," she said, eyes locked on the man in the hat. "And I'd rather share a table with him for one honest hour than spend a lifetime listening to cowards talk tough behind syrup-stained menus." No one moved. One of the men muttered under his breath, "You're just a waitress." Zariah turned to him. "Yeah, I am. A waitress who works 2 jobs, takes care of her sick mother, and helps her little sister fight through depression and racism and every other weight this world throws at young black girls. So if being a waitress makes me less in your eyes, that says more about your eyes than it ever will about me." Then she turned to Cassian. Her voice softened, but her spine stayed straight. "I'm sorry you had to hear that, but I'm not sorry I said something." Cassian looked up at her, really looked, and for the first time since he walked in, something shifted in his expression. It wasn't pride, it wasn't gratitude, it was respect. Deep, unshakable, earned. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "You just reminded me why I came back here." The moment held for a beat longer before the manager, an older white woman who usually stayed behind the counter, rushed over, flustered and red in the face. "Zariah, honey, maybe step outside, cool off a little." Zariah didn't move. "You want me to step out for standing up to harassment?" she asked. The woman hesitated, looked at the 3 men, looked at the silence in the room, realized the tide had shifted. "No, let's all just take a breath." Cassian stood up. "If she's leaving," he said, "I'm leaving, and I have no problem telling the world why." That did it. The 3 men tossed a few crumpled bills on the table and left, muttering about cancel culture and sensitive folk. As the door shut behind them, the room exhaled. Zariah sat back down. Her hands were shaking, but her face was calm. Cassian smiled slightly. "You don't need a resume to lead. You already do." Zariah smirked. Just another day in the diner. But deep down, she knew something had changed. Not just in the room. In her. In him. In what this table now represented. And in the truth that had been made plain to everyone watching. Sometimes, courage doesn't look like a cape or a headline. Sometimes it wears a red uniform, a gold name badge, and speaks truth with a steady voice while the world watches in silence. After the confrontation, the diner never quite returned to normal. The hush hung in the air like smoke, even as silverware clinked and coffee poured again. People kept glancing over, some with curiosity, others with quiet admiration. But Cassian and Zariah ignored it. They sat at their corner table, 2 strangers no longer pretending to be strangers, bonded now by something rawer than conversation. Cassian took a slow sip of his water, then looked at Zariah, not with the guarded gaze of a public figure, but with the stripped-down honesty of a man who was tired of carrying everything alone. After the confrontation, the diner never quite returned to normal. The hush hung in the air like smoke, Even as silverware clinked and coffee poured again, people kept glancing over, some with curiosity, others with quiet admiration. But Cassian and Zariah ignored it. They sat at their corner table, two strangers no longer pretending to be strangers, bonded now by something rawer than conversation. Cassian took a slow sip of his water, then looked at Zariah, not with the guarded gaze of a public figure, but with the stripped-down honesty of a man who was tired of carrying everything alone. "You want to know how I lost my leg?" he asked. Zariah tilted her head, unsure whether to say yes or wait for him to continue. She didn't have to answer. Cassian exhaled like the memory physically ached. "It was 2 years ago. I was here in Charleston, looking at properties. I had this idea, wanted to build a tech incubator, something local, something for the kids who grew up like I did. A place that believed in them before the world told them not to believe in themselves." He paused, rolling his shoulders slightly, like the story weighed more than his frame could carry. "I was heading back to my hotel when I saw this little boy, maybe 6 years old, run into the street, red toy truck bouncing across the asphalt. No one else saw him, or maybe they did and just froze. Zariah didn't breathe. I didn't think. I just moved, shoved him out of the way, took the hit instead." He didn't describe the impact. He didn't need to. "It crushed everything from the knee down. Bone, muscle, gone. The doctors said if they tried to save it, I'd spend years in and out of surgery, or worse. So I told them to take it." Zariah finally spoke, her voice soft. "Did the boy make it?" Cassian nodded. "Not a scratch. His mom sent me a letter. Said I was a hero." He smiled bitterly. "I didn't feel like one. Still don't. For months, I sat in a private hospital room with everything money could buy, and none of it stopped the nightmares. Not from the accident, from before." Zariah looked at him, quiet but alert. "Before?" Cassian stared down at his hands. "When I was 10, I got jumped in a group home. 5 boys older than me. Said I talked white. Said I acted better than them. They broke my nose, cracked a rib, left me in the hallway overnight. Staff didn't do anything. Said boys will be boys." Zariah's jaw tightened. "I learned then that survival was about silence. Don't cry. Don't speak unless it's code or strategy. Don't let them see they got to you." He looked back at her now, eyes sharp and open. "I built my life on that silence. Got good at winning. Better at not needing anybody. But when I lost my leg, I couldn't hide anymore." The confession hung there. "You ever felt broken?" he asked suddenly. "Not just hurt, broken. Like even if you healed, the blueprint still cracked." Zariah nodded slowly. "Every day." Cassian smiled again, this time softer. "I figured. You carry yourself like someone who rebuilt from ashes." Zariah looked away, her voice quieter now. "Sometimes I don't even know what I'm rebuilding toward." Cassian leaned in, his tone turning thoughtful. "That's the thing about wounds. People think healing means going back to how you were before. But the truth is, some wounds don't close. They become part of your architecture." Zariah raised her eyes. "And you're saying that's okay?" "I'm saying it has to be, or we're all doomed." For the first time that day, Zariah saw past the headlines and the suits, past the billion-dollar company and the tech genius label. She saw the boy who'd been left bleeding in a hallway, the man who gave up his leg to save a child, the human being who, despite everything he built, still wasn't sure if he deserved peace. She reached for the coffee pot, refilled his cup, and then her own. No words, just presence. Cassian smiled, this time real. "You always this generous with your refills?" he asked. Zariah cracked a grin. "Only for people who bleed honesty at the table." They clinked mugs, porcelain against porcelain, and drank in silence. And somewhere between sips and glances, they both realized, you don't need 2 legs to stand for something. You don't need a cape to be brave. And sometimes, the bravest thing of all is telling someone your pain before they ask. Cassian wasn't the only one carrying wounds he didn't talk about. Zoraya knew how to wear strength like armor. Most people only ever saw the smile, the bright, dimpled grin she gave out with every cup of coffee. But that smile was crafted, practiced, a survival skill, not a reflection of ease. She had learned early how to make herself easy to be around. Not too loud, not too opinionated, always helpful, always polite. Because being a young black woman in the South meant knowing how quickly admiration could turn into suspicion, how fast praise could become policing, and even in Midtown Grill, where she'd worked for years, the praise often came with qualifiers. "You're so well-spoken, Zoraya. You've got such a bright personality for a waitress. You're not like the others." They meant it as compliments, but Zoraya heard what they weren't saying, heard it every time. She'd once dreamed of something else, something more, and not the vague better life people always talk about in coffee shop small talk. No, Zoraya had a plan. She wanted to be a physician assistant, not a nurse, not just part of the team. She wanted to be in the room where decisions were made, wanted to be the one holding a child's chart, explaining a diagnosis to scared parents, making a difference that mattered. She got into a program too, full ride, made her mother cry on the kitchen floor when the acceptance letter came in the mail. But then her mother got sick. Breast cancer, stage 3. It happened fast. 1 month she was fine. The next she was fainting in the grocery store and waking up in a hospital bed with a doctor explaining the difference between chemo and radiation and how both would feel like war. Zoraya dropped out before the semester started, told the program director she'd defer, said she'd come back in a year. That was 3 years ago. Since then, her life had shrunk into a 3-mile radius: the diner, the clinic, the pharmacy, and the apartment she shared with her mother and younger sister, Lila. Lila had been her mother's shadow growing up, quiet, artistic, always sketching in the margins of her school books. But the sickness changed her too. The stress cracked something open inside her, and depression moved in like an uninvited guest. Some nights, Zoraya would come home from her shift and find Lila sitting in the dark, staring at the wall. No music, no sketchbook, just silence. Zoraya never said anything in those moments. She'd just sit down beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and wait. Because sometimes the only thing you can offer someone in pain is not leaving. Cassian didn't know any of that when he asked to share her table, but now, sitting across from him, watching the way he listened, really listened, Zoraya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: seen. Not for her uniform, not for her past, not even for her pain, but for her presence. She looked down at her hands, at the faint scars on her knuckles from years of holding hot plates and wiping down counters. Then she looked back at him. "You want to know something funny?" she asked. Cassian raised an eyebrow. "I was supposed to be someone else by now, somewhere else, not wiping down booths and memorizing people's coffee orders. But life decided I needed a detour." Cassian leaned in. "Maybe that detour led you exactly where you were supposed to be." Zoraya laughed, soft but real. "You believe in that fate stuff?" He nodded. "I believe pain doesn't waste time. It teaches, and it sends people to each other for a reason." She thought about that. Thought about how many days she'd walked into this diner on autopilot. How many times she'd almost quit. How many moments she'd stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m., asking God if she was wasting her life in a red uniform behind a counter that didn't see her. And yet, here he was. A man who could eat anywhere, meet anyone, and he had asked to share her table. Maybe Cassian was right. Maybe her story wasn't on pause. Maybe this was the part where it finally started moving forward again. And maybe, just maybe, being more than a waitress didn't mean leaving the diner. It meant being fully herself wherever she stood, even if the world didn't always clap when she did it. The sun had begun its slow descent beyond the city skyline. casting long amber shadows through the diner windows. Outside, the sky deepened into a soft orange, and the glow lit Cassian's face as he sat across from Zoraya, coffee half drunk, mind full. She had just finished telling him about her mother, about the diagnosis, the sacrifices, the way her dreams had folded themselves into corners so her family could stay whole. Cassian listened the same way he led, focused, without interruption, giving her story the weight it deserved. Zoraya had expected polite nods, maybe even distant sympathy. What she didn't expect was the silence he held when she was done. A silence that didn't feel empty, but full, like it was building towards something. Cassian reached into his leather bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. Nothing fancy, no company logo, just a tab, slightly worn, like he'd opened it and closed it many times before walking into the diner that day. He slid it across the table. Zoraya blinked. "What's this?" "An offer," Cassian said. Her brows furrowed. "For what?" He nodded toward the folder. "Open it." She did. Slowly. Inside were 2 crisp sheets of paper, letterhead from Rookforge, Cassian's company. At the top, her name, Zoraya Whitmore. She scanned the first paragraph, her eyes widening. "You're offering me a job?" she asked, confused. Cassian nodded. "Not just any job. A full-time position with full benefits. Health, dental, vision, plus relocation if needed, though I'd personally recommend staying in Charleston. The office is still under construction, but I've got a team here already laying the foundation for the incubator I told you about." Zoraya stared at him. "But why me?" Cassian leaned back, thoughtful. "Because when I came here, I wasn't looking for talent on paper. I was looking for character, resilience, someone who's already built something with nothing, someone who knows how to show up, for others, for themselves, when the world makes it hard." He paused. "You're that someone." Zoraya looked down at the folder again, heart pounding. "You don't know me," she whispered. Cassian shook his head gently. "I've seen enough to know the kind of person you are, and that matters more to me than a degree or a resume." She closed the folder, hands trembling slightly. "But I'm not trained. I don't know anything about tech." "I'm not hiring you to write code," he said. "I'm building a community-focused team inside the incubator. People who understand how to connect with the city, how to mentor, how to build bridges between kids like Isaac and opportunities that feel a million miles away. That requires heart, empathy, integrity. You've got all of that, and more." Zoraya sat back, overwhelmed. "No one's ever offered me something like this." "Then it's about time," Cassian said. She studied his face. There was no condescension, no pity, just belief. The kind she hadn't felt from another adult since her high school biology teacher told her she had hands made for healing. "But what if I fail?" she said softly. "You won't," Cassian replied without hesitation. "But even if you stumble, we'll catch you. That's the point. We're not building a tower, we're building a table. And there's a seat here with your name on it." Zoraya laughed under her breath. "You and these tables." Cassian smiled. "It's funny, right? Everything I've built, the billions, the tech, the awards, none of it matters as much as that one question I asked you earlier. Can I share this table?" She looked down again at the folder, then at him. "You sure you're not just doing this out of guilt, for Isaac?" Cassian didn't flinch. "I won't lie, Isaac brought me here, but this offer has nothing to do with him. This is about you." He stood up, gathering his cane, adjusting his jacket. "You don't have to say yes now. Take your time. Read the details. Call the number inside. Go through the process like anyone else. But know this, Zoraya." She looked up. "I don't offer seats at my table lightly." He paused, looked around the diner one last time, then back at her. "But when I do, it's because I believe someone deserves to build their own." With that, he nodded, turned, and walked out into the Charleston dusk. Zoraya sat there long after he was gone, the folder still open, her fingertips resting on the edge like she was afraid it might vanish if she let go. Because maybe, for the first time in a long time, someone hadn't just seen her. Someone had chosen her. The sky finally cracked open. Charleston's late summer humidity had been thick all day, clinging to skin and breath like a warning. Now, as Cassian disappeared down the sidewalk, the first heavy drops began to fall. Slow at first, then all at once. Fat, urgent rain that hit the diner windows with a sound like applause. Zariah didn't move. She sat there at the corner booth, folder still in her lap, steam curling up from her untouched coffee. The offer letter lay open like an unanswered question. Outside, thunder rolled low and steady, a reminder that change, real change, never shows up quietly. Her reflection in the glass looked older in that moment. Not tired, just weighted, like all the strength she carried for others had caught up to her bones at once. Across the diner, the manager flipped the open sign to closed. The kitchen lights dimmed. A few regulars lingered over late pie and slower conversations, but no one bothered her. And Zariah? She was somewhere between disbelief and ignition. Cassian's words replayed in her head, looping like a song stuck on a line that wouldn't quit. We're not building a tower, we're building a table. And there's a seat here with your name on it. Zariah had always worked tables, cleaned them, reset them, served them. But this was the first time in her life someone had invited her to sit at one that could change everything. She could still hear her mother's voice in her mind, sharp and loving. Don't you let this world decide what you're worth, baby girl. You hear me? You decide. But deciding was the hard part, wasn't it? What if she took the job and failed? What if she succeeded and forgot who she was? What if this offer was real, but the price was too high? Thunder cracked again, louder now, closer. The rain came harder, flattening the street outside. A few passing cars created waves that crashed against the curb. It was the kind of storm that usually shut Charleston down. But inside Zariah, something was burning. Not fear, not confusion. Fire. The kind that came from knowing you were standing at a crossroads. One road safe, familiar, paved with the wear of sacrifice. And the other, unknown, uneven, terrifying, but alive with possibility. She could keep waiting tables. She could go home tonight, check her mother's meds, kiss Lila's forehead, and pretend this day never happened. It would be easier. But nothing great ever came from easy. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket and opened her notes app, started typing. A list, just for her. What I know for sure. 1. I've been surviving. I want to start living. 2. I'm more than the worst things people have called me. 3. I'm scared. But I've done everything scared and still showed up. 4. My dreams didn't die. They've just been waiting. 5. I belong at the table. When she finished, she looked at the last line for a long moment. Then she hit save. The fire in her chest grew steadier, controlled, focused. She stood up, tucked the folder under her arm, and walked to the door. The manager called after her. You sure you want to head out in that storm? Zariah turned, smiled just enough to be polite. There's a bigger one inside me. Then she pushed the door open and stepped into the downpour. The rain soaked her instantly, chilling her arms, flattening her hair. But she didn't run. She walked. One step, then another. Like a woman who had somewhere to be. Because she did. She didn't know exactly where yet, but she knew she wouldn't be sitting still waiting for the next chance to show up. She'd chase it. The streetlights flickered through the storm, gold halos casting long reflections on the wet pavement. Zariah moved through them like she belonged in every frame. Because for the first time, she wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's idea of her. She was expanding. And if anyone asked her what changed, she'd tell them, it wasn't the offer. It was that someone saw the fire and didn't flinch. The folder sat on Zaria's kitchen counter like it carried weight beyond its pages. Lila had already gone to bed, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Her mother, Evelyn, was in the next room, sleeping after another long treatment, her body thinner, her breathing soft but steady. Zaria had barely slept since Cassian handed her the offer. But it wasn't nerves about the job or even excitement. It was the feeling that something about this entire encounter, his presence in Charleston, his interest in her specifically, didn't fully add up. She reached for her phone, opened the photo she'd seen weeks ago in the community Facebook group, the one where Cassian's younger brother Isaac stood beside her, grinning, arm around her shoulder. It was a blurry shot from the back kitchen of the diner, taken during a staff birthday 3 years ago. Zaria barely remembered the moment. Isaac had only worked at Midtown Grill for a couple of weeks, filling in for a cousin. He was charming, sarcastic, and always late. And then he was gone. She never thought twice about it. People came and went in food service. But now, Cassian was here, looking for Isaac. That photo had brought him to her. But what else had it revealed? A soft creak behind her broke the silence. Zaria turned to see her mother standing in the hallway, wrapped in her worn gray robe, eyes tired but clear. "Can't sleep either?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zaria shook her head. "Just thinking." Evelyn walked over slowly and sat at the table. Her eyes drifted to the open folder, then to her daughter. "That man from the diner," she said. "He looked familiar." Zaria's heart skipped. "You saw him?" Evelyn nodded. "Not in person. Years ago. In a photo. He was with him." She didn't have to say it. Zaria knew. Isaac. Her mother didn't respond, just stared at the folder. Zaria leaned in, voice low. "Mom, who was he? Really?" Evelyn hesitated. Then she exhaled a breath she seemed to have been holding for decades. "I never told you this. I thought I could bury it. For your sake." Zaria tensed. Evelyn looked up at her daughter, pain behind her eyes. "Isaac was your brother." Zaria froze. "What?" "Half-brother. I met his father before I met your dad. It didn't last long. He left before I knew I was pregnant. I was only 20, and I was scared. Then I met your father. He knew. He accepted Isaac like his own." Zaria's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he ran, Zaria. When your father passed, Isaac changed, got reckless, angry. You were just a kid. I didn't want you wrapped up in his chaos. When he left Charleston, I figured it was for the best." Zaria felt the world tilt beneath her. Cassian wasn't just some stranger looking for a long-lost sibling. He was her family's family, her blood's blood. That's why he looked at her like that, why he asked to sit with her, why something about her had seemed to stop him cold. They were connected in a way neither of them fully understood. Evelyn placed a hand over her daughter's. "I kept it from you because I thought I was protecting you, but now, maybe it's time to stop hiding from the hard truths." Zaria swallowed hard. All those days serving coffee, surviving shifts, pushing dreams aside, she had been walking alongside shadows of her own story. And now, those shadows had names. Cassian wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a seat at a table that was, in some unexpected way, already hers. It started as a whisper. The footage was grainy, shot from a cell phone by a college kid sitting 3 tables away. He hadn't meant to capture anything special, just thought it was weird that a billionaire tech CEO had walked into a diner in Charleston and asked a waitress to share her table. He uploaded it that night with a cheeky caption, "When a CEO sits with a waitress, something's up." By morning, it had over 400,000 views. By noon, it was trending on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Table7, hashtag Black Dignity, #HiddenWorth, #Cassian and Zariah. People weren't just watching the video, they were feeling it. The way Cassian's voice trembled when he asked to share the table, the way Zariah looked stunned but not intimidated, the stillness in the room, the curiosity, the weight. It wasn't just a moment, it was a shift. Someone uploaded a slowed-down version with soft piano behind it. Another added subtitles in 3 languages. News outlets picked it up within hours. Tech titan humbled in Southern Diner. The waitress who changed a billionaire. Charleston encounter sparks national dialogue on race, class, and grace. What none of them knew yet, what Cassian didn't even know, was that the video captured the precise moment when everything started to unravel and rebuild. Zariah found out about the video from her manager, who was panicking about privacy issues. But by then, it was too late. Her name was already circulating. People were tagging her Instagram, digging through old photos, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. She tried to lay low, to ride the wave quietly. But Charleston was buzzing. Customers came in just to sit at her table. Locals took selfies outside the diner. Someone left a note with her tip that read, "Thank you for showing us what grace looks like." Still, Zariah didn't feel powerful. She felt exposed. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't signed a waiver, hadn't expected to become a symbol for something she was still figuring out inside herself. And then the emails started. Hundreds of them, from women who said they saw themselves in her, from teachers, mothers, med students, baristas, and veterans, from people who had been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside, and who suddenly saw a piece of their story in hers. One email stood out. It was from a woman in Detroit. It read, "Zariah, I watched your video 5 times in a row, not because of Cassian, but because of you. I've worked tables for 12 years. No one's ever asked me to share anything but my time. Watching you hold space like that, it reminded me I have worth too. Thank you for reminding me. Tina M., 43, single mom." Zariah cried when she read it, not because she felt proud, but because she'd almost said no that day, almost brushed Cassian off, almost kept walking. And now the world was watching her say yes. Cassian saw the video a day after it went viral. One of his assistants forwarded it with the subject line, "You're literally everywhere right now." At first, he ignored it. He didn't do press, didn't care for public reaction. But curiosity got the better of him. He clicked, watched, and for the first time, he didn't see himself as the center of the story. He saw her, the way she paused, the tension in her posture, the moment she looked him in the eyes and really saw him. Not the name, not the limp, but the man. He saw the dignity in her yes. He watched the comments scroll beneath the video. "I felt this in my bones. Black excellence is quiet sometimes. This is it. Tables aren't just for food. Sometimes they're for healing." And then there was one that stopped him cold. It was short. What if she's the key to finding Isaac? Cassian stared at that sentence for a long time, because deep down, he knew. She was more than a waitress, more than a viral moment. She was the bridge, not just to a brother who vanished, but to something bigger, something that looked a lot like truth. Cassian stood at the edge of the pier, the Atlantic wind brushing against his face. The Charleston Marina was quiet that morning. Gray skies overhead, waves whispering soft secrets below. He had come here as a boy with his father, back before life hardened him, back when Isaac still clung to his hand during storms, back when family meant something simple. Now it meant unanswered questions and ghosts in every reflection. He hadn't spoken to Zariah since the video went viral, not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure what to say. He had come to that diner looking for Isaac, and he'd found something else entirely. Someone who reminded him what it meant to show up, to see people. Someone who, with nothing but her presence, cracked open a version of himself he didn't know still existed. But it wasn't fair to drag her into his unresolved past, and yet she had every right to know the truth. So he sent the text. "Meet me where it started. Table 7, noon." Zariah stared at the message when it popped up on her phone. Her stomach tightened, her heart too. The days since the video had felt like walking through someone else's dream. Strangers recognizing her at the grocery store, journalists calling the diner, influencers using her name in hashtags. She should have felt flattered. Instead, she felt displaced. All that attention, yet no one really knew her. Not the way Cassian did after sitting with her in silence, after hearing her story, after seeing her not as a trend, but as a whole person. At 11:58, she walked into Midtown Grill. It was emptier than usual. Rain was in the forecast again, and most folks had opted to stay home. The manager gave her a quiet nod, understanding this was personal, private. Cassian was already seated at table 7, facing the window. He stood when he saw her. No suit today, just a plain black shirt, jeans, the sleeve on his prosthetic visible. He looked younger without the armor of wealth, more human. Zariah slid into the booth across from him. They sat in silence for a few beats, the way people do when the air between them holds more than words. Cassian finally spoke. "I know who you are now." Zariah blanked. "What do you mean?" Isaac didn't just work at the diner. He didn't just smile for a photo. Cassian paused, choosing his next words carefully. "You're his sister, half-sister. Evelyn is your mom." Zariah inhaled sharply. "I found out a few nights ago," she said softly. "She told me everything." He nodded, his jaw clenched. "I came to find Isaac, but what I found was you." Zariah looked away, her fingers tracing a ring of condensation on the table. "I'm not him," she whispered. Cassian shook his head. "No, you're better." She looked back, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward. "You stayed. You carried people. You didn't run." His voice cracked. "And I think, maybe, I needed to find you before I could face him." Zariah's chest tightened. "You think he's still alive?" Cassian shrugged, eyes distant. "I don't know, but I know I was chasing a version of closure that doesn't exist. And you, Zariah, you gave me something Isaac never could. Which is? A second chance." He pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. Zariah opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. An official letter from Rookforge. Not a job offer, a scholarship. Full tuition, room and board. A guaranteed internship in her final year. "You wanted to be a physician's assistant," he said. "That dream doesn't have to stay buried." Zariah stared at the paper, blinking hard. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied. "Say yes to yourself." She laughed through her tears. "You're really bad at casual gestures, you know that." Cassian grinned. "I never claimed to be subtle." Outside, the rain finally began to fall. Gentle, not violent. It wasn't a storm this time. It was a washing away, a beginning. Zariah folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Okay," she said, "let's rebuild. Not just careers, not just legacies, but a name, a story, a family, fractured but still breathing." Cassian reached across the table and took her hand. No cameras, no headlines. Just two people sharing a table again, this time not as strangers, but as survivors. And from that table, they began something new, something honest, something worth building. Cassian had spent a lifetime building walls, some made of steel and glass, others of silence, ambition, and grief. But none had been as impenetrable as the one wrapped around his heart, until Zariah. They weren't dating, not officially, not in the way tabloids would have described it, had they even known. But over the following weeks, they became something more, sacred than labels. They became safe. Cassian started coming to the diner, even when he didn't need to. Sometimes he brought his laptop and worked from the corner booth. Other times, he just sat and listened to the soft clink of plates and the rhythm of Zariah's laughter as she moved between tables. Zariah began tutoring again. Nights at the local community center, weekends at the shelter. When she wasn't working or studying, she was helping Lila with homework or taking Evelyn to appointments. But somehow, in the chaos of their separate lives, they found a rhythm. Cassian never treated her like a charity case, never once made her feel like his offer came with strings. He saw her fire, not just her wounds. And she saw something in him too, something gentler than the world gave him credit for. One Friday evening, after the diner closed and the streets had emptied into silence, Cassian showed up at her doorstep. He was soaked from the rain, a small bouquet of sunflowers in his hand. "I know it's late," he said, "but I needed to say something." Zariah stepped aside, letting him in without a word. The apartment was warm, dimly lit. Lila was asleep. Evelyn was watching an old gospel special in the next room, volume low. Cassian handed her the flowers, still dripping with rain. "I've been thinking about Isaac," he said quietly, "about what I wanted from him and what I was trying to fix in myself." Zariah nodded, setting the bouquet in the sink. "Do you remember what he used to say," she asked, "when he showed up late for shift?" Cassian smiled faintly. "No, what?" He'd say, "Life doesn't wait for apologies, it just keeps going. So either walk with it or get left." Cassian laughed softly. "Sounds like him." They stood there for a moment, quiet but not awkward, just full of things unsaid. Cassian broke the silence. "I'm tired of walking alone, Zariah." Her breath caught. "I've built things, companies, systems, strategies, but none of them kept me warm at night. None of them held my hand when the pain came back. None of them called me out when I disappeared." He stepped closer. "You do, even when you don't mean to." Zariah's voice was barely a whisper. "I never asked for this." "I know," he said. "Neither did I." He took a breath. "But here it is. This, us. It's not polished, it's not planned, but it's real, and I don't want to pretend I'm okay without it." Zariah looked up at him, eyes shining. "So what are you asking me, Cassian?" His hands found hers, rough palms, warm grip. "I'm asking," he paused, voice thick, "can I share this life with you?" Zariah didn't answer right away, because this wasn't a fairy tale proposal. This was real, messy, complicated, but it was also honest. And maybe that was enough. She squeezed his hands. "You sure you want someone who comes with overdue bills, late-night stress cries, and a mom who'll ask you 20 questions before she lets you sit at Thanksgiving?" Cassian grinned. "I've had boardrooms tougher than that." She laughed. "Then yeah," she whispered, "you can share this life." He leaned down and kissed her, slow and certain, like a man who had finally come home after years of wandering. Later, they sat on the floor of her tiny kitchen, sharing leftover pie and stories neither had ever told another soul. Not everything was solved that night. There were still bills, still grief, still questions about Isaac. But for the first time, they weren't facing them alone, because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet question and a single, sacred yes. The table was still there. Midtown Grill hadn't changed much, even after the viral wave had crashed and receded. New tiles in the back maybe, a fresh coat of paint near the counter, but Table 7, Zariah's table, remained untouched. It still sat near the front window, worn at the edges, polished from years of elbows, conversations, and quiet moments that changed everything. Cassian and Zariah didn't come here every week like they used to. Life got busy. School started, Evelyn's treatments intensified. Rookforge's board asked more of Cassian. But whenever either of them needed to breathe, to remember who they were before the cameras and the pressure and the noise, they came back. Today, it was just Soraya. She sat alone with her coffee, eyes drifting across the morning light, casting gentle shadows through the blinds. Lila had just aced her first presentation. Evelyn had finished another round of chemo, and Soraya had just submitted her midterms. She was tired, the kind of tired that sits deep in your chest, but she was grateful. A woman walked past her, paused, then turned back. Mid-50s, kind face, slight nervousness in her eyes. "Excuse me," she said. "I don't mean to bother you, but are you Soraya from the video?" Soraya smiled softly. "I am." The woman sat down carefully, like the table might not hold the weight of what she carried. "My name's Denise," she said. "I'm a teacher, Chicago Public Schools. I just wanted to thank you." Soraya blinked, surprised. "Thank me?" Denise nodded. "That video saved my daughter. I don't mean that lightly." She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table, revealing a photo of a beautiful young girl, no older than Lila. She's 17, was being bullied at school. She felt invisible, said the world didn't have space for someone like her. Denise swallowed hard. But then she watched you, this strong, smart, unapologetically black woman, standing in your truth, and she saw herself. She said, "Mom, maybe I belong somewhere too." Soraya felt her throat tighten. She reached across the table, touched Denise's hand. "You tell her she does. She absolutely does." For a moment, they were quiet. Not weird, just full, like two people who don't know each other seeing something holy. After Denise left, Soraya leaned back, looking out at the street where it had all begun, and she thought about everything that had led her here. A folded napkin, a soft voice, a man in a suit who didn't ask for service, but for space. And then she thought about all the people who had ever felt small, forgotten, uninvited. So she pulled out her notebook, the one she used to journal, and she started writing, not about Cassian or the company or the past, but about the lesson. You belong here, not because of money, not because of status, not because someone gave you permission, but because you are here. Your breath is enough. Your story is valid. Your existence is proof. Too many of us wait for someone to say it first, to hold open the door, to save us a seat. But what if we stopped waiting? What if we built our own tables? What if we pulled up chairs for others, not after we make it, but while we're still becoming? Because the truth is, the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs present people. People like Soraya, people like you. So if no one's told you lately, you're worthy, you matter, you belong. And if you ever forget that, come back to table 7. Because sometimes the place where you once served becomes the place where you're honored. And sometimes the smallest yes becomes the loudest declaration that your story has always had value. This has been a Hidden Worth story. If it moved you, if it reminded you of your own seat at the table, share it. Not just the video, but the message. We rise when we rise together. So ask the question, offer the seat, and don't be afraid to say yes.